Welcome to another season of NASCAR DFS coverage right here on Awesemo.com. It is time for the Daytona 500 strategy show. Of course, you all know the guy there to my right. That is, you know him as Ray Sheets. I know him as Phil. Phil, how are you doing here on this early Saturday afternoon, just about 24 hours away from the start of the NASCAR season?
Good, bud. I mean, we are going from the literal Super Bowl to the Super Bowl of NASCAR. It's been too long, as I told you earlier. The layoff, it's been good to reset, get the honey-do list knocked out, but I'm ready to get back into NASCAR for sure.
Of course, a little programming note. Tomorrow we will have a live before lock, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with myself and Chris to get you ready for the Daytona 500. Of course, Phil, let's get right into this. As let's talk a little bit about roster construction. What's kind of your best advice on how our listeners should be constructing their lineups for tomorrow?
The main thing that I try to emphasize to people, especially if this is your first time playing NASCAR DFS, like, in past years, you haven't given it much thought, but, slowly but surely DraftKings and FanDuel continue to bump up these contests. Now it's finally gotten your attention, or you've just decided, you know what, I'm going to stop being the stereotypical DFS player and make fun of NASCAR. I'm going to jump in. If this is your first time, or your first time in a long time, you have to understand that Daytona is an anomaly. Daytona is what we consider a super speedway. It's 2.5 miles in length because of the length, because of the banking, because of the way that they set up the cars. This will be a unique race. Like next week, they're going to race at the Daytona Road Course. Not going to be anywhere close. 2 weeks from that, they're going to go down to Miami Homestead to race around the 1.5-mile oval there. It's not going to be the same race. So since this is such an anomaly, we build our lineups in a very different way. This week, we are looking for two main things: finishing position and place differential. These are the two main things that we're caring about. Because this race can become very chaotic, it can end up with a high DNF rate where drivers are wrecking out, whether it be their own fault or somebody else that wrecks 2, 3, 4 rows in front of them, and they just get caught up in the carnage. So because there's so much chaos, we are looking for whatever safety that we can grab. And that safety is found in these drivers that typically start in the latter half of the field. These are the drivers that are going to make up the majority of our lineups, if not all of our lineups.
I want to mention, as we talk about roster construction, we got this question in Slack earlier this morning. Of course, if you want to leave a question here during the show, you can do that in Slack if you're one of our premium members, or leave it right here on YouTube. We'll get to those questions as we do go on throughout the show. But the question was in relation to Fantasy Cruncher and the rules that should be set for tomorrow's race.
Right, and this is one of the more interesting things, is that I took some time, went through Fantasy Cruncher, tried to find some common themes, like just to see if there was a common theme from week to week. And, this isn't like NFL, NBA, NHL, soccer, name your sport, where the rules that you have for Fantasy Cruncher or whatever lineup builder that you're using, they're going to stay pretty consistent from slate to slate. NASCAR, it changes. It evolves as the races evolve with the amount of laps and, of course, how chaotic the racing can be. If you're using your lineup builder, preferably you're using Fantasy Cruncher because you have an Awesemo subscription and you've added FC on to just automatically import Alex's ownership numbers, his fantasy points, whether you're looking at DraftKings or FanDuel. Go to your advanced options there in the upper left-hand corner. Unique players this week, probably 2 to 3 per lineup. This is a week where you're going to have a lot of drivers in your player pool, a lot more than you normally do. And you're generally going to cap your ownership at these guys at somewhere like at the low end, maybe 40%, and at the high end, 60%. We'll talk about these guys that I feel a little more safer with than the other guys. So you give yourself a 2 to 3 unique player per lineup. That'll ensure that these lineups really get switched around. Team salary, we're not worrying about salary whatsoever because we are looking for place differential and finishing position. You could end up with a lineup with $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, even $20,000 left over because of what you're trying to do with these lineups. Your caps, like I talked about, I mean, that could be anywhere from 40 to 60%. If you go over 60%, you are adding a lot more risk to your lineups, because if one guy or two guys wreck out, then your lineups are sinking. And the randomness, that's just a matter of what you're comfortable with. Generally, when it comes to NASCAR, I like to set my randomness somewhere between 10 to 15%. I might bump that up for a race like today. And one added thing that you could do, play around with, is that if you feel strongly enough about a driver, like, you know, that the hands down guy on DraftKings that most people are going to put in their lineups is going to be Denny Hamlin. And if you just want to ensure that you get Danny, then you can go create a new group, put Denny, put Kaz Gralla, put Austin Cindric, blah, 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 Ross Chastain. And in that group, tell it that it has to have 2 to 4 of these guys, 3 to 4 of these guys. These are just different ways to ensure that the main core of guys that you want in these rosters are there.
Yeah, I would say, you know, just in terms of, you know, other sports, typically I'm in that 15 to 20% when it comes to randomness, and I'm usually at least 2 players unique per lineup. And one thing I'll tell you this for our newer NASCAR DFS players, because I learned this last year as I became the host of this show, is don't check your DraftKings lineups midway through the race. Just wait till the end of the race.
Right.
I learned that lesson. I'm like, oh man, I'm looking really good in risk. Like, what happened? So I kind of learned I don't even look at my teams until the race is over.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Alex basically had a tweet about that earlier this week of, you know, it's NASCAR season when these things kind of do happen there. Of course, I appreciate everyone here on a Saturday afternoon that is watching us. Of course, be sure to hit that thumbs up button right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe bell as well and get that notification so you know when a new show is live here on the channel. Of course, we got several shows for you today. Coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern time, it'll be the NHL Strategy Show. Then at 4:30, it'll be MMA Live Before Lock. And then at 5:30, we'll get you ready for tonight's NBA action with Deeper Dive. And Live Before Lock, also a little note about free content we got over right now at the website. NBA Big Board, NHL Top Stacks, and MMA Fire Projections are all free today over at Awesemo.com. Of course, a term that I got very familiar with last year during this show is dominators. You didn't mention dominators when you were talking about roster construction. Kind of talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know, generally our first concern is the dominators. And once again, if you're new to this whole concept, dominators, just what the crap is a dominator. Dominators are the DFS way of saying drivers that accumulate fastest laps and laps led points. They're a bit of a concern on FanDuel, although you only get laps led points, but you definitely make them a point of your lineups here on DraftKings. The problem is that, like we talked about, this race is so chaotic that you could have a driver accumulate a bunch of laps led points, but he goes into a corner, gets a bump draft from the guy behind him, gets turned, loses 20 to 25, 30 positions, and all of those points, they're worthless because he lost so many points due to negative place differential. If you have the race sheets open, which I encourage everyone to look at, remember they are free this year. If you're trying to find a place where they're at, just scroll through my tweets on my timeline. You will find a link to the race sheets for the Daytona 500. As you look at the laps led, you will constantly see that there are drivers who are leading 50, 70, maybe even 100 laps per race. But when you look at what the top 2 drivers from each Daytona race, what ends up happening to them, they inevitably lose place differential. In last year's summer race at Daytona, your top 2 lap leaders ended their day 27th and 33rd. In last year's Daytona 500, your top 2 lap leaders, one was Denny Hamlin, but we all play Denny Hamlin because he started 21st. And then your second top lap leader finished 36th. And you can go through this. There's negative place differential everywhere. It becomes a point where it's not worth chasing those bonus points, because inevitably what happens to these guys, they lose place differential, and there's only so many laps led points available on the board that they lose a couple of spots and they end up counterbalancing each other for the most part. So once again, we go back. What can I bank on? Place differential. If a driver gains place differential, those points can't be taken away from him. And where he finishes the race, aka finishing position, those are the two safest things that we can bet on in this race.
I guess one thing we should mention about is weather in Daytona. I'm in Tampa, which is about 2.5, 3 hour drive. I know it's been a little windy and rainy here. So how much are you concerned about potentially tomorrow in weather?
It's not fantastic, and this is a point that we'll get to when we talk about the cheaper run teams, because there are a bunch of cheaper run teams that are running one-offs this weekend. Practice, it went on for a couple of laps this morning, and then it got canceled, and they've already said that they're not going to run the second practice session later this afternoon, and Xfinity wasn't able to run their qualifying sessions. So they have a full 40 car field later this afternoon. That was set by last year's owner points. The thing that scares me is that a lot of these cheaper run teams, they need this practice session in order to get the bugs worked out. And a lot of them are just going in straight cold turkey from the dual races on Thursday into this race. So if they had some sort of issue that they might have been worried about mechanically, they're not getting it figured out with the car actually getting on the track. So some of these guys, like everybody's cursing his name, Derek Cope from Thursday night, because he nearly caused a pile up on the last lap. Your guys like Quinn Half, Josh Billicky, the brand new Live Fast team that BJ McLeod's driving for, and then you've even got rookies like Anthony Alfredo. It just adds that much more crap. What's going to happen to a race where you're already, crossing your fingers and your toes once the green flag waves?
Of course, I want to let you know about a great promo we got going on over at Awesemo.com. We got a promo for a weekly NASCAR pass, which is 50% off. So it's only $4.98. It gives you everything you need for NASCAR DFS. You got to get in those ownership projections. That we also have the projections for the drivers, whatnot, to help you build those lineups. So check it out right there at Awesemo.com. Just go to Awesemo.com/promos to take advantage of a NASCAR weekly pass for $4.98. And of course, if you want an Awesemo weekly pass for all the sports, you can get that for $29.95. But Phil, let's get right into the top tiers in terms of salaries, and these are based on DK prices. So this is the 10K range on DraftKings. So we got Denny Hamlin starting 25th, 10,400. Chase Elliott starting 12th, 10,300. Brad Keselowski 24th, starting 10-1. Ryan Blaney 14th. He's at 10,000 over on the FanDuel side of thing. Hamlin's 14,000. Chase Elliott's 13.5. Keselowski 12.5, and Blaney 13.3. So when you look at these four drivers, is there one driver that really sticks out to you of he's the guy to build your lineups around?
Yeah, and I mean he's going to be the chalk. We've already got him projected as the highest owned driver according to Alex's ownership projections. It's Denny Hamlin. You're getting him starting 25th. I mean, he has won 3 of the last 4 Daytona 500s in last year's super speedway races. He had no finish outside of the top 5. He averaged 33 laps led per race, which was tops in the field for this Sunday. I mean, he is probably hands down the best super speedway racer in all of NASCAR right now, and you're getting him at a fair price at $10,400. I mean, DraftKings isn't making this tough for the average Joe to walk in here and make a lineup. He's at a fair price. He's got tons of place differential. He can probably do just exactly the same as he did last year when he started 21st, worked his way up to the front, and led the most laps. There's nothing stopping him from doing it this year. In the hour-long Wednesday practice session, the Toyotas looked really good when they were all running together, and now they've got an extra teammate in Bubba Wallace to help their endeavors. I mean, everything lineups for Hamlin to just be a smash play. It's just a matter of how comfortable are you with a driver that is going to be the highest owned driver, regardless of what you're looking at, cash or GPP?
When you look at the ownership of these top four, the one that are getting a little lesser ownership, is there one that sticks out to you that you say, you know what, if you want to play the ownership game and you want to take one of these top four options in terms of salaries, this may be the driver to look at?
Yeah, it's Ryan Blaney. We've got him pegged at below 15% right now, and of course, with him starting 14th, that's going to scare people off because he doesn't have that much place differential to offer. But the main intrigue with Blaney is that he does have at least 10 plus place differential that he can gain. But the main thing that really kind of opens my eyes about Blaney is that he is a legitimate, true threat to win this race. He has been up at the front, past several Daytona 500s. He was right there on that last lap with Ryan Newman before Newman ended up barrel rolling into the fence and nearly died that evening. Blaney is such a strong super speedway racer. He won the spring Talladega race last year. When you look in terms of average finish last year at super speedway races, he had an average finish of 24th, and that actually I was looking at Joey Logano. Sorry. Average finish of 8.5, which is third best in all of the field. So, I mean, his numbers are a little bit better at Talladega for whatever reason, but when you just look at super speedways as a whole, Ryan Blaney is such a strong driver. And, I mean, when it comes down to Chase Elliott versus Ryan Blaney as like a single option for GPPs where you're reaching above the halfway threshold and trying to get a guy that's going to be lower owned for those tournament lineups, give me Blaney every single time. I mean, I understand that Chase has the second best odds at DraftKings Sportsbook right now. He's plus 1,000 to win the race, while Hamlin is plus 800. But the only thing that I can figure out for Elliott is that he is still riding a wave of fandom from winning the championship last year. When you look at Chase as a super speedway racer, there is nothing to excite you about. Yes, he finished second in the Daytona summer race last year when William Byron won that event. But other than that, he has just perennially been a guy that finishes no higher than 17th if he just doesn't outright wreck. So if it comes down to, I want to play Chase, I want to play Blaney as a lower owned option in this price range, in this starting range, you definitely got to go with Blaney.
We'll move on to tier number 2. This will be the drivers in the 9K and 8K range over on DraftKings. So just kind of give you the names here. We got Joey Logano, Kevin Harvick, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., Alex Bowman, William Byron, Kurt Busch, Eric Almirola, Kyle Larson, Austin Dillon, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I know in reading one of your articles over at Awesemo.com, you really pointed out the history here with Martin Truex Jr. I know we're seeing some notable ownership, especially on the FanDuel side of things. Talk to the people about why maybe there should be a little buyer beware here on Martin Truex Jr.
Yeah, I mean, believe me, the start guys in the back is the worst kept secret in all of NASCAR DFS. A couple of years ago, I remember that was the thing that you kind of whispered under your breath to your friends on Twitter, or you might mention it in a Slack chat because it was the best way to just make some easy money. And slowly but surely, the secret came out. Everybody found out the news, and I mean, everybody knows to do this now. That's why our 4 top highest owned drivers, according to Alex on DraftKings, they're all starting 20th or worse. People know what to do when it comes to building these lineups, and I think they're just a dog chasing their tail when it comes here to Martin Truex Jr. They see him starting in the middle 20s. They see all that place differential. They know the name. They know he comes from a top tier team. It's like, why shouldn't I play Truex? And if it comes down to cash games, yeah, I mean, you probably play him, if nothing else, just as an ownership block because he will be highly owned along with Hamlin in cash games. But when it comes to tournaments, he's a guy that I can see really going under ownership on. His numbers are all over the place. Like when it comes to career average finish, Daytona is his worst track. It does not matter where you are looking at. Daytona is absolutely his worst track. His recent numbers here at Daytona have gone 4, that was last summer, 32, 22, 35, 2, and 18. 2 lead lap finishes and 2 DNFs among those 6 races. He's everywhere. I bet if you were to ask him straight up, he would probably tell you that he does not enjoy super speedway races because, I mean, there's not really that much skill involved. It's just a matter of surviving and, having a little luck and attrition on your side. So if the field is going to come in so high at Truex, looking here at his number, we've got, I mean, you are looking at a driver over 40%. If you're wanting a place to pivot because of ownership, don't go Galaxy Brain and do it with Hamlin. Truex is probably the guy that you should be looking to do that with.
One of the guys that we're seeing literally bare minimum ownership on is the guy on the pole, and Alex Bowman. What's kind of your take on what you're seeing on the essentially almost very little ownership on him? And what I mean very little, I mean very little, all caps.
Right. Bowman has a couple of things going against him. Is one, he might have to go to a backup. He might have to change out his engine. There's something squirrely going on there, and they were supposed to use practice to get that figured out because they were running the car and then bringing it back through NASCAR's little laser machine to figure out that everything was still right, so that they wouldn't have to start at the rear for unapproved adjustments. But that's out the window, so we don't know if Bowman's going to have to start his way at the back. But I mean, starting position for when it comes to prospects of a driver winning, they're kind of useless. So, if you're looking to make a bet for outrights or top threes, top tens, whatever book you're looking at, and you waited thus far, you probably did yourself a favor, because I noticed on DraftKings Sportsbook that a lot of guys' numbers incrementally increased just simply because they got a bad starting position. But back to Bowman. You look at Daytona pole sitters in the past. Average lap sled 25.3. So, I mean, really not that many dominator points getting converted there. You're looking at somewhere between 6 to 7. Fastest laps, we can't consider those because fastest laps just they go randomly all throughout the field. But the main thing to note is average finish. So he has nowhere to go for place differential, so he has to finish high. But you look at the last 14, 16 pole sitters, their average finishing position is 20.3. So on average, they're losing 19 positions. And if we just simply go back to the last 4 years, that average finishing position is still 22. So, I mean, whether you're looking long-term or short-term, it's not the greatest numbers. And the main thing to remember with all of these guys that start in single digits is because they start so high, they carry that much more risk for negative place differential. There's just so much risk that you need them to lead a ton of laps and finish in the top 5 in order for them to be in the optimal lineup.
Looking at some ownership, and you mentioned about these drivers that are in the single digits where they're starting, you're seeing very low ownership. When you look at some of the drivers in this tier that we are seeing ownership, Kyle Larson, Kurt Busch, what's your take on them and where they're starting at?
The Kyle Larson, I can kind of get that because people might be a little hands off with Larson. Surely everybody watching this is well aware of what happened with Larson last year during the COVID break and the comments that he made while doing some iRacing and getting released from Chip Ganassi. And this is his one chance redeemed, and somehow his one chance redeemed put him in a better seat than he was last year. He starts 13th. Larson's viability to win, it's kind of there. A few seasons ago when Kurt Busch won this race, Larson was leading on the final lap, and then he ran out of gas. So he's been there before. He's got a strong company of drivers to run with. We know that the Hendrick drivers, they all have, they run really well here. They produce tons of horsepower. He'll have some really good running mates to run with. It's just a matter of, how rusty is Larson in a stock car. if this was a dirt track race, then there'd be no fears. But this is really the first extended look that we're seeing at Larson in a stock car. Busch ownership, I mean, crap. Busch is exactly where you want him. He's at 20th. So I mean, like if you have this idea that I split the field down the middle and I only take guys starting 21st and beyond, then you're missing out on Busch. But I mean, Busch is there. He's gonna get place differential. His average finish here at Daytona over the last 3 seasons, it is not good. It is 27.5. But I mean, he's going to give you place differential. We've seen him win here before. If he gets towed up with the rest of the Chevys like we typically see, and I mean that's a lineup building strategy in and of itself, is just putting Chevys together, Toyotas together, Fords together, blah 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 blah. If Kurt can hang with the Hendrick guys, then he will find his way to the top 5, no problem.
Of course, this is the Awesemo NASCAR DFS Strategy Show right here on Awesemo.com. Don't forget, join us tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Live Before Lock shows. Myself and Chris will get you ready for the Daytona 500. Also, be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at Awesemo_com, as we are trying to get to 30,000 followers on Twitter, and we are giving away 30 free weekly passes to followers that do follow our main account over there at Awesemo_com. Also, be sure to follow our NASCAR account at Awesemo NASCAR. Also, be sure to follow Phil at Race Sheets, because one of the things you got to be paying attention to is, if it's an hour before the race, does someone fail and all of a sudden magically they're at the back of the field? So that's one of the things you got to be paying attention to as you're developing your NASCAR lineups here leading up to tomorrow's race. Let's move on to tier number 3, Phil, and that is the drivers in the 7K and 6K range. So that's Matty D, Chastain, Bell, Wallace, Jones, Reddick, Newman, Buescher, Custer, Briscoe, McMurray, McDowell, Cindric, and Ryan Peace. Cindric is a guy that's getting a ton of ownership, starting 39th, something you kind of have already kind of talked about. 6,100 on DK, 6,200 on FanDuel. So let's just start right there, just because of the amount of ownership we're seeing coming in on Austin.
Yeah, and cash games, as much as I don't like the idea of Cindric being that heavily owned in cash games, I think it's just you just wave it on and go on with your lineup. Because I mean, he's only got so far to go back, which is one position. What's going on in Cindric's favor? This is a Penske car. The Fords are generally fast at Daytona, so he can hook up with the rest of the Fords that run really well. We're talking about Newman, we're talking about Buescher, we're talking about McDowell. Whatever becomes of Anthony Alfredo in tomorrow's race, he can hook up with the rest of his Penske teammates. Blaney, Logano, Keselowski, Matty D. So I mean, there's lots of partnerships here to be strung together to help Cindric in his aim. He's been so at super speedways in his Xfinity career. In the duel write-up, I pointed out how over the last 10 races, he was tied with Brandon Jones for the most top 5s in the Xfinity series. So he's got a propensity to move himself forward. It's just a question of how big is this stage for Cindric? Is it too big? I generally like to do a hands-off approach when it comes to rookies, first start at Daytona, and especially with a guy like Alfredo, who hasn't turned a full-time season in either the Truck Series or the Xfinity Series. There's a lot to scare me about Cindric. It went wrong in the dual race on Thursday night, and quite frankly, he should have lost his spot, and we could be talking about Ty Dillon, but he's here. He's got so much place differential to gain, and I mean, if he just races clean, and that may be the whole scenario for the Penske team for Cindric, is just hang out at the back, just ride around for 175 laps, and then towards the end, your teammates will come get you, and we'll make our charge to the front. That might be the smart thing with Cindric. What they're doing, who knows? But a strong case can be made for Cindric, but he has a lot of things going against him in his favor. And especially for DFS, if these ownership numbers stay up, this is going to be a guy that will be easy to get off.
I know earlier in the chat had a question about Matty D, 7,900 on DK, 8,200 over on FanDuel.
He's a guy that I believe should be in your core tomorrow. Like if you're gonna, for me, my core is going to be guys that are at max 60% owned. So I'm talking about Hamlin. Going down the board, it's probably going to be Busher. I love Busher in super speedway races. It may even include Ross Chastain because of how well that he's run in inferior equipment at super speedways. And now you're giving him a better car with more horsepower. Matty D, you look at his finishes here at Daytona: 12, 19, 8. Yeah, he had a 28, a 7, and then a 27. But consistently throughout his career, he's run pretty well. You've got the Penske partnership in there. He's a guy that I can see bringing home a 5th to a 10th place finish. Now, that may not excite you for tournaments, but for me, that's safety that I'm going to try to bank on.
I know we talked a little about Bubba Wallace at the end of last year. Obviously, there's a change there that he's had. He's starting 6th. Christopher Bell starting 5th. Ryan Newman 7th. Those are the drivers that are in the single digits here. Out of those trios, is any of those are they more of a GPP / cash play or vice versa?
In cash games, you can't touch these guys. Just way too much risk. But in tournaments, like if you're going to build a GPP lineup and you're building 150 max and you want to have a sprinkling of all of these guys in the top 10, should they lead laps and end up finishing their day, I mean, you can make the argument for Bell. He ran really well in the dual race. You can definitely make the case for Bubba. I mean, I always joke about NASCAR being the sport of narratives, and NASCAR would love nothing more than for Michael Jordan's driver to win the Daytona 500 this Sunday. They're the puff pieces coming out of Charlotte, North Carolina about the team owned in Charlotte, North Carolina would be out of this world. Like if you watched the truck race last night, practically every segment that Fox ran was about Hailie Deegan making her inaugural truck run. Mm-hmm. The racing gods have done weirder things, and it would not surprise me to see Bubba in a position late in the race on Sunday to win. And quite frankly, he's looked good in the dual races. He should have won that duel on Thursday night. He was in position to win, but he lost his drafting partner. Austin Dillon had a head of steam, crossed him up, and ended up winning that race. So, I mean, Bubba's looking good. He's got the Toyota partnership. I think there's a lot of things in Bubba's favor. And if you wanted to have him as a one-off potential lap leader who finishes top 5, that's something I can definitely get behind in tournaments.
Yeah. As you look at the rest of this one, obviously there's definitely some point differential drivers in this tier. I mean, we got several drivers who are in the 20s and the 30s. Some of the drivers that we haven't mentioned that do you believe are potential good plays tomorrow?
Yeah. I've got Eric Jones highlighted as a cash play because he starts 31st. He's got tons of place differential. We've seen him win at Daytona before. It was the summer 2018 race, but then he came back and finished 3rd in the winter 2019 race. Now, since then, his finishes have been 35th, 18, 23. I'm not going to hold last year against him because he was just, when we resumed racing after the COVID-19 break, he was